The moment you start chasing an avoidant, something invisible but powerful switches off inside them. It's not that they don't care, it's that their nervous system reads pursuit as pressure. And pressure to an avoidant feels like danger. From the very first text you send too quickly, the extra reassurance you offer, the emotional explanation you repeat, hoping they'll finally understand, their body tightens. Their mind starts scanning for escape. What looks like love to you feels like loss of freedom to them. Avoidance learned early in life that closeness came with a cost. Maybe it meant being controlled, overwhelmed, or emotionally responsible for someone else. So, when you chase, even gently, it activates an old survival program. Instead of moving closer, they pull away to regulate themselves. Silence becomes safety. Distance becomes control. Here's the part most people miss. Chasing actually removes the space where an avoidance feelings can grow. When everything is available, there's nothing for them to process. No curiosity, no longing, no internal movement. They don't miss you because you never leave room to be missed. And the more you chase, the more they associate you with emotional weight rather than emotional relief. Understanding this isn't about playing games. It's about realizing that love for an avoidant only begins when pressure ends. There is one boundary that doesn't punish an avoidant, doesn't manipulate them, and doesn't push them away. It regulates them. It's the moment you stop over-explaining, overreaching, and over-functioning for the connection, and you quietly decide that emotional access to you requires emotional presence in return. You don't announce it. You don't threaten to leave. You simply match energy with clarity and calm. When an avoidant feels this boundary, their nervous system does something unexpected. It settles. There's no emotional chase coming at them. No demand to perform intimacy on command. No fear that they'll be swallowed by someone else's needs. For the first time, being near you doesn't feel like work. It feels like relief. And that relief creates safety. This boundary shifts the power dynamic internally. Instead of reacting to their distance, you remain grounded in yourself. You respond, not pursue. You share, not plead. That consistency teaches their nervous system that connection with you is predictable and non-invasive. Over time, curiosity replaces avoidance. They start checking in emotionally on their own, not because they're forced, but because it finally feels safe to do so. What changes everything is that this boundary restores respect for you and for the bond. And respect is the doorway through which avoidants begin to feel real attachment, not fear. Emotional pressure doesn't feel like love to an avoidant. It feels like being cornered. The moment emotions come with urgency, expectations, or unspoken demands, their system goes into self-protection mode. Even if the words sound soft, the energy underneath matters more. A question asked too many times, a need expressed with anxiety, or a conversation that feels like it must resolve something right now can be enough to make them shut down. Avoidants learn to survive by minimizing needs, especially emotional ones. So when someone brings strong feelings toward them, their brain translates it as responsibility. They don't think, I'm wanted. They think, I'm about to be needed in a way I can't sustain. That fear isn't logical, but it's deeply wired. Pulling away becomes the fastest way to calm their body and regain control. What looks like coldness is actually regulation. Distance gives them space to breathe, to feel autonomous again, to stop the internal alarm. And here's the painful paradox. The more you try to close the gap during this moment, the wider it feels to them. Pressure compresses their emotional world until escape feels like the only option. When pressure is removed, something shifts. Without urgency chasing them, emotions can surface naturally. But as long as love feels heavy, avoidance will always choose space over closeness. Not because they don't care, but because their system doesn't feel safe enough to stay. The moment you stop overgiving, something subtle but powerful begins to happen inside an avoidant. The constant emotional noise disappears. There's no longer a stream of effort, reassurance, or availability flowing toward them without pause. And in that quiet, their internal world finally has room to move. Overgiving had been doing the emotional work for them. When it stops, they're left with their own feelings. And that's when awareness begins. At first, they may feel unsettled, not because you did something wrong, but because the dynamic changed. The comfort of being pursued is gone, and with it, the illusion that they can stay distant without consequence. This creates a gentle internal tension. They start wondering. They notice your absence emotionally before they notice it physically. Curiosity replaces certainty. Without you carrying the connection, they're forced to check in with themselves. Do I miss this? Do I want to reach out? Why does this feel different now? These questions don't come from pressure. They come from space. And space is where avoidants actually process attachment. What's important is that this shift isn't about withholding love. It's about restoring balance. When you stop overgiving, you stop being an emotional buffer for their avoidance. And in that stillness, they begin to feel the bond more clearly, not because you pushed, but because you finally stepped back. When you hold this boundary, something unexpected happens. The distance doesn't grow, respect does. Avoidants don't respond to words about self-worth. They respond to emotional consistency. When you stop chasing, stop over-adjusting, and stop collapsing your needs to keep the connection alive, you communicate something powerful without saying a thing. I value myself, and I don't abandon myself for closeness. Inside an avoidant, this lands differently than people expect. Instead of feeling rejected, they feel oriented. There are clear emotional edges now. They know where you stand, and that clarity reduces anxiety rather than increasing it. Your boundary signals that connection with you is intentional, not desperate. That steadiness earns respect because it removes the imbalance that made them feel unconsciously superior or pressured. Respect is what allows attraction to stabilize. When you're no longer bending yourself to maintain access, they can't take you for granted. They begin to sense that emotional access to you is something that must be earned, not assumed. And that realization doesn't push them away. It invites them to step forward. This is how distance turns into dignity. You're no longer reacting to their moods or gaps. You're grounded, self-contained, and emotionally present without overreaching. For an avoidant, that combination feels rare, and it transforms the connection from something to escape into something worth moving toward. The fastest way to make an avoidant shut down isn't anger, silence, or even conflict. It's trying to force emotional clarity before their system is ready for it. The mistake happens when you push for reassurance, labels, or deep talks at the exact moment they're already overwhelmed. You may think you're fighting for the relationship, but to them, it feels like being emotionally cornered with no exit. When you demand answers, explain your feelings repeatedly, or ask them to just open up. Their nervous system hears one message: I'm not enough as I am, and I'm about to disappoint someone. That shame response is paralyzing. Instead of leaning in, they disconnect to protect themselves from failure and emotional overload. Another part of this mistake is rescuing the connection every time it wobbles. When you smooth things over, apologize too quickly, or take responsibility for their distance, you teach them that withdrawal has no cost. There's no reason for them to regulate themselves because you're doing it for them. What shuts them down fastest is not your emotions. It's the urgency attached to them. When love comes with pressure to fix, explain, or commit immediately, avoidants feel trapped. And when they feel trapped, they disappear emotionally. The irony is that the more you try to secure closeness, the more you teach them that distance is the safest option. Attraction grows naturally when there's space for desire to breathe, and this boundary creates exactly that. When you stop chasing and start standing firmly in your own emotional center, you become less predictable, not in a manipulative way, but in a grounded, self-contained way. Avoidants are drawn to what feels calm, sovereign, and non-intrusive. This boundary shifts you into that energy. Instead of feeling pulled on, they begin to feel pulled toward. Your presence no longer demands anything from them, which allows their curiosity to wake up. They start noticing you differently, not as someone needing reassurance, but as someone with their own full emotional life. That independence is magnetic because it removes the pressure that usually kills attraction for them. Another key change is polarity. When you stop overgiving, you stop flooding the connection with availability. This creates a healthy emotional gap where interest can form. They begin wondering what you're thinking, how you're feeling, and whether they still have access to you in the same way. That wondering is the seed of attraction. What makes this powerful is that it's authentic. You're not pulling away to provoke a reaction. You're simply no longer abandoning yourself. And for an avoidant, self-respect reads as emotional strength. That strength feels safe, intriguing, and desirable all at once. Attraction doesn't have to be chased when it's quietly invited. Avoidants don't feel emotions in real time the way others do. Their responses are delayed, filtered through safety first. When closeness happens, their system focuses on self-protection, not emotional awareness. Feelings are pushed aside so they can stay regulated. That's why, in the moment, they may seem unaffected, calm, or even distant. But the emotional processing doesn't disappear. It's postponed. Time and space are what allow their feelings to surface. When pressure is gone and there's no immediate demand to respond, their guard slowly lowers. Only then do they start registering what they felt, what they lost, and what your presence actually meant to them. This is why avoidants often realize attachment after distance, not during intensity. When you hold your boundary and stop overgiving, you unintentionally activate this delayed response. In the quiet, memories replay. Emotional moments resurface. They begin to miss not just your presence, but the way being with you felt when it was calm and safe. That missing doesn't show up dramatically. It shows up internally as restlessness, curiosity, and subtle longing. This delay can be confusing if you expect immediate reassurance. But for avoidance, emotion moves slowly and deeply once it's allowed. And the boundary you hold gives their system the one thing it needs to feel: time without pressure. Love doesn't rush in for an avoidant. It unfolds quietly once safety is established. Emotional safety isn't created through constant closeness or deep talks. It's created through consistency without intrusion. When they sense that they won't be overwhelmed, corrected, or pulled into emotional intensity they can't manage, their body finally relaxes. And relaxed systems are capable of bonding. In this safety, something new happens. They begin to associate you with ease instead of effort. Being with you feels grounding, not draining. There's no need to perform or defend. That calm allows affection to grow naturally, without fear attached to it. Love starts showing up in small ways first: longer conversations, spontaneous check-ins, subtle vulnerability, not because they're pushed, but because they want to stay connected. What's important is that this growth feels voluntary to them. They're choosing closeness instead of being pulled into it. That choice builds genuine attachment rather than obligation. Over time, trust forms, not just in you, but in their own ability to stay present without losing themselves. When an avoidant feels emotionally safe, love stops feeling dangerous. It becomes something they can approach slowly, honestly, and at their own pace. And that kind of love, once it takes root, is far more stable than anything forced or rushed. Holding a boundary with an avoidant without fear or guilt starts with one truth: your emotional needs matter just as much as theirs. This isn't about punishment or control, it's about self-respect. When you understand that setting limits is an act of care for both yourself and the relationship, fear begins to lose its grip. Guilt only arises when you believe that prioritizing your well-being is selfish. The moment you release that belief, the boundary becomes natural, not heavy. Start by clarifying your intentions internally. You're not withdrawing to manipulate or test them. You're withdrawing to create balance and safety for you and for them. Keep your focus on your own behavior, not theirs. Respond when it feels right, stop when it doesn't. Ground yourself in the certainty that emotional presence is earned, not demanded. and that your consistency communicates respect more than chasing ever could. It helps to remind yourself that discomfort from the avoidant is not your responsibility. Their initial resistance or confusion is part of their internal process, not a reflection of your worth. The more you practice this, the less fear and guilt surface. Over time, holding this boundary feels calm, confident, and even magnetic because it signals that you are whole, steady, and unshakable, which is exactly the energy avoidants are drawn to.